He never loved you, Abby. Not the way he loved me. I was his escape, his real life. You were just convenient. Gina stood in her living room, bouncing her 1-year-old son on her hip. The birthday party guests shifted uncomfortably, conversations dying as she raised her voice. Tyler has his eyes, don't you think? His father's eyes. I felt the room spinning as 40 people, coworkers, neighbors, friends, watched me crumble. My husband had been dead for exactly 17 days. Mark wanted his son to have what was rightfully his, Gina continued, reaching into the diaper bag slung over her shoulder. She pulled out a folded document, thrusting it toward me with manicured fingers. His will. He signed it 3 months ago when he found out I was pregnant. My hands trembled as I unfolded the paper. Legal language swam before my eyes, but certain phrases stood out in stark relief. To my son, Tyler, half ownership of the property at 1542 Pinecrest Road, valued at approximately $800,000. I didn't want to do this today, Gina said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. But I thought it would be easier with everyone here to support you. I'm only asking for what belongs to Tyler. Someone gasped. A glass shattered somewhere behind me. We can be reasonable about this, she continued. You can keep living there while we sort out the details. I'll need the master bedroom, of course, and we'll have to convert your home office for Tyler's nursery. The party guests were statues now, watching this car crash in slow motion. I looked around at their faces. Horror, pity, morbid fascination. These were people I'd worked with for years. My neighbors, people who'd attended Mark's funeral, hugged me, brought casseroles to my door, and now they were witnessing my complete humiliation. I'm sure this is a shock, Gina said, adjusting Tyler on her hip. Finding out your husband had another life, another love. She smiled, a small, victorious curve of her lips. But Mark always said you were understanding, reasonable. He said that's why he married you in the first place. The document in my hands suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The world narrowed to a pinpoint, and for a moment, I thought I might actually collapse. But something else was bubbling up beneath the shock, something that made me bite the inside of my cheek to keep from letting it show. I handed the will back to her, my face carefully blank. I see, I said quietly. Then I turned and walked out of the party without another word. No one followed me. The things people do for money, for revenge, for power, ever incredible, aren't they? If you've ever been blindsided by betrayal, hit that like button. If you've ever had to swallow your words while planning something bigger, subscribe now. And if you're wondering what happened next, keep listening. Because what Gina didn't know about me, about Mark, and about that house would change everything. My name is Abigail Preston. Abby to my friends, which suddenly seemed a much smaller circle than I'd thought. I'm 34 years old, a senior account manager at Brighton Marketing, and 17 days ago, I became a widow. And now, apparently, I was sharing my home with my husband's mistress and their child. Except I wasn't. Not by a long shot. I drove home from the party in complete silence. No radio, no phone calls, nothing but the sound of my own breathing. The sprawling craftsman house came into view as I rounded the corner. My house, with its wide porch and the maple tree I'd planted when I first moved in. 7 years ago, before I even met Mark, the house I'd bought with my inheritance when my grandparents died. The house that had only my name on the deed. I walked inside, kicked off my heels, and poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon. Then I started to laugh. It began as a chuckle, grew into a full laugh, and eventually became something close to hysteria. I laughed until tears streamed down my face and my stomach hurt, because Gina had no idea who she was dealing with. I met Mark Preston at a charity auction 4 years ago. He was charming, successful, and seemed genuinely interested in my work. We dated for 8 months before he proposed. The wedding was small, just 50 guests at a local vineyard. We honeymooned in Portugal. Life was good. Mark moved into my house after the wedding. We discussed putting his name on the deed, but I hesitated. Not because I didn't trust him, but because the house was my safety net. My grandparents had raised me after my parents died, and this house was my connection to them. My independence. Mark said he understood. Our marriage wasn't perfect. I haven't been. Whose is? But it was good. At least I thought so. He traveled often for work, sometimes gone for a week at a time. I focused on my career, working my way up from junior copywriter to senior account manager. We talked about having children someday, but agreed to wait until we were more settled. Then, 6 months ago, Mark started acting differently. He was distracted, irritable. Our conversations became shorter, more functional. He started working late, traveling more. When I asked if something was wrong, he blamed stress at work. I believed him. Or maybe I just wanted to believe him. 3 months ago, Mark died in a car accident. He was driving home late from work when his car went off the road and hit a tree. The police said he hadn't been drinking. Just tired. Maybe. A moment's inattention. That's all it takes. The funeral was a blur. I remember standing in the cemetery, watching them lower his casket, feeling hollow. Gina was there. She worked in our accounting department. I remembered thinking how kind it was that so many coworkers had come. She'd hugged me, told me how sorry she was, never mentioned a baby, never mentioned that she'd been sleeping with my husband, and now this. A first birthday party that became my public execution. My phone buzzed with a text from Amelia, my closest friend at work. "Are you okay?" That was insane. "Call me." I didn't respond. Instead, I went to my home office and pulled out our financial records. Mark and I had separate accounts and one joint account for household expenses. We split everything. 50-50. Despite the fact that I earned more. I checked our credit card statements, bank records, everything. Looking for traces of Gina, of secret gifts, hotel rooms, anything that would confirm her story. Nothing jumped out at me, but Mark had been careful. He always was. The bourbon burned pleasantly as I swallowed another sip. A plan was forming in my mind, not a confrontation. That would be too easy, too expected. No, something more intricate. Something that would give me answers while letting Gina dig her own grave. My phone rang. Amelia again. This time I answered. "What the actual hell was that?" she demanded without preamble. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I'm going to find out. Do you think it's true?" "About Mark and the baby?" I stared out the window at the darkening sky. "I don't know that either. But the will is fake." "How can you be sure?" "Because the house is mine, just mine. Mark's name isn't on anything." I paused. "And there's no way he wrote a will without telling me." Silence on the other end. Then, "So, what are you going to do?" I took another sip of bourbon. "Nothing. Yet." "Nothing?" "Abby, she just humiliated you in front of everyone we work with. She's claiming half your house." "I know, and she'll regret it." I set down my glass. "But first, I need to understand what game she's playing. Why now? Why like this? Because she's an opportunistic snake? Maybe. Or maybe there's something else going on." I thought for a moment. "Did you know she was pregnant? Before today?" Amelia hesitated. "I heard rumors. She was on leave for a few months. Came back about 6 weeks ago. But I never saw her with a baby before today." Interesting. I hadn't been paying much attention to office gossip in the months before Mark's death. And after, well, I'd taken bereavement leave. Only been back at work for a week. "Abby," Amelia said hesitantly, "what if the baby is Mark's?" The question hung in the air between us. What if? What if my husband had been living a double life? What if he'd fathered a child with another woman while married to me? What if he'd been planning to leave me? "Then I'll deal with that too," I said finally. "But first, I need to know the truth. All of it." After hanging up, I poured another drink and went upstairs to our bedroom. Bedroom now. I opened Mark's closet, still full of his clothes. I hadn't been able to go through them yet. The familiar scent of his cologne hit me. and for a moment, grief overwhelmed everything else. I sat on the floor, surrounded by his things, and let myself cry, for the man I thought I knew, for the life I thought we had, for the future that was gone. When the tears finally stopped, I began to search. Not just his clothes, but every pocket, every hidden corner. In the inside pocket of his winter coat, I found a small key I didn't recognize. In his bedside table, beneath a stack of magazines, a prepaid phone I'd never seen before. And in his home office, hidden in a hollowed-out business book, a small notebook filled with his handwriting. As I flipped through the pages, my heart pounded harder. Dates, times, short notes, and a name that appeared again and again, Gina. My hands trembled as I leafed through the notebook, page after page of Mark's neat handwriting, documenting meetings with Gina stretching back 14 months, coffee shops, restaurants, hotel rooms, sometimes just times and places, sometimes brief notes. G worried about work finding out. G wants more time together. G pushing for commitment. O, the last entry was dated just 2 weeks before his death. Told G about baby. Complicated now. I sank into his desk chair, the notebook heavy in my hands. So it was true. Or at least part of it was true. Mark and Gina had been involved. The baby might really be his. The betrayal cut deeper than I thought possible. A physical pain that radiated through my chest. But something still wasn't adding up. If Mark knew about the baby, why hadn't he said anything to me? And this will Gina was flashing around. Where had that come from? The prepaid phone I'd found was dead. I plugged it in, hands shaking as I waited for it to power on. No password required, just a list of text messages and calls, all to and from the same number. Gina's, presumably. I scrolled through the messages, each one another knife to my heart. Miss you already, she'd written. Last night was amazing, he'd replied. I forced myself to keep reading, to absorb every painful detail. The most recent messages, from 3 weeks before his death, showed a different tone. Gina, we need to talk about what happens next. I can't keep this secret much longer. Mark, I know. I'm trying to figure things out. Gina, what's there to figure out? You said you'd leave her. I'm going to say, Mark, it's complicated. Gina, the baby isn't complicated. He deserves his father. Mark, I'm not ready for this conversation over text. We'll talk in person. The final message from Gina, sent the day before his accident. I'm done waiting. Either you tell her, or I will. I sat in the growing darkness, connecting the dots. Had Mark been planning to leave me? Or had Gina pressured him into a corner he couldn't escape? And this will... Where did that fit in? My phone buzzed with an email notification. The sender, Gina Hamilton. Subject, moving forward. Abby, it read. I understand today was a shock, and I apologize for the public nature of our conversation. I thought having people around might make it easier for you. I was clearly wrong. I hope you've had time to review Mark's will. I've scheduled a meeting with my attorney next week to discuss the transfer of property. I'm willing to be reasonable about the timeline. I understand you need time to process everything. For Tyler's sake, I hope we can handle this amicably. Mark always spoke highly of your rationality. He said it was what he respected most about you. I'll be by tomorrow at 2 p.m. to discuss next steps and see the property. As you can imagine, I need to plan for my son's future. With sympathy, Gina. The audacity was breathtaking. She'd humiliated me publicly, claimed my husband had fathered her child, presented a suspicious will demanding half my house, and now expected me to welcome her with open arms. I almost admired her confidence. I didn't respond to the email. Instead, I called my own attorney, Patricia Chen, and left a message explaining the situation. Then I took the notebook, the phone, and the key and locked them in my safe. Sleep was impossible. I lay awake, replaying moments from my marriage, searching for signs I'd missed. Had Mark really been unhappy? Had I been so absorbed in my own work that I'd failed to notice him slipping away? Or had he simply been a liar, skilled at leading a double life? Morning brought no clarity, but it did bring determination. If Gina wanted to play games, she'd discover I was a formidable opponent. But first, I needed more information. I showered, dressed carefully in a blue dress that made my eyes look sharper, and drove to the office. It was Saturday, but I knew a few people would be there, catching up on work, including, I hoped, Owen from HR, who owed me a favor. The office was quiet, just a handful of cars in the parking lot. I found Owen in the break room, pouring himself coffee. "Abby." He looked startled. "I didn't expect to see you today, especially after." He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. "After my husband's mistress announced her paternity claim at a birthday party?" "Yes. Well, life goes on." I kept my voice light, pouring myself a cup of coffee. "Actually, I could use your help with something." Owen shifted nervously. "I don't know if I should get involved in personnel records," I interrupted. "I need to know when Gina took her maternity leave." For legal purposes." "For legal purposes." He hesitated. "That's confidential information, Abby. You know I can't, remember last year when you accidentally sent that inappropriate email to the entire company instead of your girlfriend?" I took a sip of coffee. "And I helped you convince IT it was a system glitch before anyone in leadership saw it." Owen's face reddened. That's not the same thing, isn't it?" "I'm not asking for her medical records, Owen. Just dates. When she went on leave, when she returned. That's all." He sighed, shoulders slumping. "Fine. Give me a minute." 10 minutes later, I had what I needed. Gina had taken leave from November 15th to February 28th. If her son just turned 1, that meant he was born in early June, which meant conception would have been around September the previous year. I thanked Owen and left quickly, mind racing. September. Mark and I had gone to his brother's wedding in September. We'd spent a week in California. Together. The entire time, something wasn't adding up. My next stop was the county records office. I needed to confirm what I already knew, that the house was solely in my name, and see if Mark had actually filed a will. The clerk was helpful, if slow, and an hour later I had copies of my deed, sole owner, Abigail Preston, and confirmation that no will had been filed for Mark Preston. I made one more stop before heading home, a locksmith. The small key I'd found in Mark's coat. I needed to know what it opened. The older man examined it carefully. "Safety deposit box," he said confidently. "Standard size. You'll need to know which bank, though." I thanked him and left, adding this new puzzle piece to my mental board. A safety deposit box. Mark had never mentioned having one. What was he hiding? When I pulled into my driveway at 1:45, Gina's red SUV was already parked at the curb. She stood on my porch, bouncing Tyler gently in her arms. She'd dressed for the occasion, sleek black pants, emerald blouse, hair perfectly styled. The picture of a grieving lover ready to claim her inheritance. "You're early," I said, unlocking the door. "I was excited to see the place," she replied, following me inside. "Mark described it so often. I feel like I already know every room." I doubted that very much, but I kept my expression neutral. "Would you like some tea?" "That would be lovely." She followed me to the kitchen, looking around with unconcealed interest. "This is even nicer than the photos Mark showed me." I filled the kettle, watching her from the corner of my eye. She moved with confidence, setting Tyler down on a blanket she spread on my kitchen floor. The baby gurgled happily, reaching for toys she pulled from her bag. "He has Mark's smile," she said, catching me looking. "Don't you think?" I studied the child. Round cheeks, dark hair, bright eyes. Maybe there was a resemblance, or maybe I was seeing what she wanted me to see. "I'm not sure," I said honestly. Gina sighed dramatically. "I know this is hard for you, finding out your husband had another life, another family. Is that what you were, his family?" "We were going to be." She straightened, meeting my eyes directly. "Mark was planning to leave you. He just ran out of time." The kettle whistled, giving me a moment to compose myself. I poured hot water over tea bags, set a cup in front of her. "Tell me about the will," I said, sitting across from her. "When did Mark have it drawn up?" Gina reached into her purse, pulled out the document she'd shown me at the party. 3 months before he died, when I told him I was pregnant, I took the paper, examined it more carefully this time. It looked professional, legal language, official-seeming stamps. Mark's signature at the bottom did look like his, but there were details that felt off. The attorney's name, James Whitman, wasn't familiar, and there was a reference to our cabin in Vermont that we definitely didn't own. I was surprised when he told me about this, I said casually, handing the document back. "We discussed wills before, but Mark always put it off. Said we were too young to worry about dying." Gina's smile tightened slightly. "Becoming a father changes a man's perspective. I suppose it would." I sipped my tea. "You mentioned an attorney? For the property transfer?" "Yes, Mark's attorney, actually. James Whitman. He drew up the will. Interesting. The same name on the document. I'd like to speak with him directly." "Of course. I'll set up a meeting next week." Gina glanced around the kitchen again. "Mark said this place has 4 bedrooms? 3, plus my office. Perfect. Tyler will need his own room, of course. And I was thinking the master bedroom. It's blessed. Let's not get ahead of ourselves." I interrupted, my voice sharp despite my best efforts. "There are legal issues to sort through first." Gina's expression hardened slightly. "The will is quite clear, Abby. Half of this house belongs to Tyler. To me, as his guardian. The will may say that. But there's a problem." I met her gaze steadily. "Mark couldn't leave what wasn't his to give. This house is solely in my name. I bought it before we married. It was never part of our marital assets." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across her face. That's not what Mark told me." "Mark told you a lot of things, apparently." I stood up. "Would you like to see the deed? The mortgage documents? All with only my signature." Gina recovered quickly, her confident smile returning. "That's a minor complication. As Mark's widow, you're obligated to provide for his son. Any court would agree. Perhaps. But we'd need proof that Tyler is indeed Mark's son." I kept my voice gentle, aware of the baby playing at our feet. "DNA testing is standard in these cases." A flash of something, panic, crossed her features before she masked it. "Of course. I have nothing to hide." "Good." I smiled thinly. "Neither do I." Gina stayed for another 30 minutes, walking through my home like she already owned it, making comments about changes she'd make. I maintained a calm facade, letting her talk herself into a deeper hole with every presumptuous statement. As she was leaving, she paused at the door. "Mark always said you were reasonable, that you'd understand if you knew the truth. That's why I approached you this way, directly, honestly." The irony was almost too much. Did he? How considerate of him. "We don't have to be enemies, Abby. We both loved the same man." I looked at her. This woman who'd slept with my husband, who was now trying to take my home, who'd humiliated me publicly. Did we, though? I'm starting to wonder if either of us knew him at all. After she left, I sat on my porch steps, watching her drive away. The confrontation had confirmed what I already suspected. The will was fake. Gina was lying. About something. Maybe everything. But why? What was her real game? My phone rang. Patricia, my attorney, returning my call. I explained the situation, sent her photos of the will Gina had shown me. "This is concerning," Patricia said after reviewing everything. "If she's presenting a fraudulent will, that's criminal. But we need to be careful how we proceed. What do you recommend?" "Don't confront her directly yet. Let her think you're considering her claims while we investigate. I'll look into this attorney, James Whitman, and we should discuss a restraining order if she continues to show up unannounced." After hanging up, I went back to Mark's notebook, rereading entries, looking for clues. The dates aligned with his business trips, with late nights at the office. He'd been methodical in his deception. but something still bothered me about the timeline. If Tyler had just turned 1 and Gina had taken leave from November to February, when exactly had she given birth? And why would Mark need to be told about the baby just 2 weeks before his death if he'd known about the pregnancy for months? I pulled out a calendar, started marking dates. Mark's trips, Gina's leave, Tyler's birthday. The more I mapped it out, the less sense it made, unless a horrible suspicion began forming in my mind. I needed more information, more evidence. But if I was right, if what I was beginning to suspect was true, then Gina's deception went far beyond a fake will or a claim on my house. It was something much darker, something worth destroying lives for. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. It rang 3 times before a gruff voice answered. Dante Investigations. Carlos, it's Abby Preston. I need your help with something delicate. I need everything you can find on Gina Hamilton, I told Carlos. Employment history, financial records, personal background, and I need it quickly. Sounds serious, he replied. What's this about? She claims my late husband fathered her child and left her half my house in his will. I think she's lying about, well, possibly everything. Carlos whistled low. That's cold. I'll start digging today. One more thing, I added. I found a key to what might be a safety deposit box. Can you help me figure out which bank? That'll take longer. Banks don't exactly advertise their clients' private boxes. Try First National Downtown first, I suggested. Mark did his business banking there. After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen, staring at the space where Gina had spread her blanket, where Tyler had played on my floor. The baby seemed innocent enough, but was he Mark's? Was he even hers? The next day was Sunday. I drove to my mother-in-law's house, heart heavy with what I needed to ask her. Eleanor had been devastated by Mark's death. Eleanor losing her only son just 3 years after becoming a widow herself. I hadn't told her about Gina's claims yet, not wanting to add to her grief. Eleanor welcomed me with a warm hug. At 68, she was still elegant and sharp, her silver hair cut in a stylish bob. We sat in her sunroom, drinking tea from her good china, a ritual she maintained no matter the occasion. You look troubled, dear, she said, studying my face. More than usual, I mean. I took a deep breath. Eleanor, did Mark ever mention someone named Gina to you? A woman from work? She frowned slightly. I don't believe so. Why? She came to see me yesterday, she says. The words stuck in my throat. She says Mark was the father of her child, a 1-year-old boy named Tyler. Eleanor's teacup clattered against its saucer. That's ridiculous. Mark would have told me if I had a grandchild. I thought so too, but she has evidence, and the timing could work. What evidence? Eleanor's voice had hardened, protective of her son's memory. I hesitated. Messages, dates, and a will that leaves half my house to her son. A will? She shook her head firmly. Mark didn't have a will. I asked him about it after Bernard died. He said you two hadn't gotten around to it yet. That confirmed what I'd already suspected. The will mentions a cabin in Vermont. Did Mark ever talk about buying property there? Vermont? No, never. Eleanor set down her cup. Mark hated the cold. Why would he buy property somewhere with worse winters than here? Another nail in the coffin of Gina's story. There's something else I wanted to ask you, I said carefully. Did Mark ever mention having a safety deposit box? I found a key. Eleanor's expression changed subtly. He did, actually. After his father died, Bernard kept important documents in one, and Mark thought it was a good idea. I believe it was at First National. My pulse quickened. Did he mention what he kept there? Insurance policies, I think. Maybe some family heirlooms. She paused. I could go with you, if you'd like. The bank might be more cooperative if I'm there. Mark was always close to that manager. What was his name? David something. David Chen, I supplied. That would be helpful, thank you. As I was leaving, Eleanor grabbed my hand. Abby, this woman, what does she want? Money, I said simply. Or at least, that's what she says she wants. Eleanor's grip tightened. Don't let her tarnish Mark's memory with lies. Whatever the truth is, find it. Monday morning arrived with a text from Carlos. Found something interesting. Can you meet at 11? I told my boss I had an appointment and left the office at 10:30, carefully avoiding the accounting department where Gina worked. Carlos was waiting at a cafe 2 blocks away, a manila folder on the table in front of him. That was fast, I said, sliding into the booth across from him. You're paying my rush fee, he reminded me with a half smile. And your Gina Hamilton is interesting. How so? He opened the folder, revealing printouts of documents, photos, and notes in his messy handwriting. For starters, she's only been Gina Hamilton for 3 years. Before that, she was Gina Harper. Name change after a divorce. Normal enough. But before that, Regina Woodson from Telluride, Colorado. Multiple name changes and multiple jobs. Never stays anywhere longer than 2 years. Always in accounting or finance. Always at mid-sized firms where she has access to money but isn't under too much scrutiny. A chill ran down my spine. Are you saying she's some kind of con artist? I'm saying she has a pattern. And it gets better. He slid a photo across the table. It showed Gina, hair dyed blonde, standing beside a gray-haired man in front of a lake house. This was taken 4 years ago in Michigan. The man is Harold Brennan, CFO of a manufacturing company where she worked as an accounting manager. 63 years old, wealthy, recently widowed. I studied the photo. They were standing close, his arm around her waist. Were they involved? Engaged, according to local news. He died 2 months before the wedding. Heart attack. Carlos raised an eyebrow. His children contested the will, which left a significant portion of his estate to his beloved fiancée, Gina, but ultimately settled out of court. My mouth went dry. You think she? I'm not suggesting murder, Carlos said quickly, just noting a pattern of targeting vulnerable men with money, then benefiting from their deaths or divorces. He pulled out another document. 3 months after Brennan's death, she moved here and started working at your company. 6 months later, she met your husband. I sat back, mind racing. What about the baby, Tyler? Carlos hesitated. That's where it gets complicated. I haven't found birth records for a Tyler Hamilton or Harper in any local hospital. What are you saying? I'm saying either she gave birth somewhere else or Tyler isn't her child. I finished, the horrible suspicion I'd had earlier returning with force. Carlos nodded grimly. I'm still looking into it, but given her history, I wouldn't put anything past her. I left the cafe with my head spinning, Carlos's folder tucked into my bag. If Gina was a con artist who targeted wealthy men, had Mark been her latest victim? Had he discovered her scheme? Was that why he died? The thought made my blood run cold. I'd been assuming Mark's death was an accident. What if it wasn't? I picked up Eleanor at 2 p.m., and we drove to First National Bank together. David Chen greeted us warmly, his expression softening with sympathy when Eleanor explained why we were there. Of course, Mrs. Preston. We'll need to verify your status as next of kin, but that shouldn't be a problem. He led us to a private office, where Eleanor produced Mark's death certificate and their family documents. 20 minutes later, we were escorted to the vault. The safety deposit box opened with a combination of my key and the bank's master key, revealing a stack of documents and a small velvet pouch. I lifted out the papers first. Insurance policies, as Eleanor had mentioned, our marriage certificate, and underneath it all, a sealed envelope with my name written on it in Mark's handwriting. My hands trembled as I picked it up. I'd like to read this privately if you don't mind, I told Eleanor and David. They stepped outside the small viewing room, leaving me alone with Mark's final message to me. I broke the seal carefully and unfolded the letter inside. Abby, it began. If you're reading this, something has happened to me. I hope it's decades from now, when we're old and gray. But if not, there are things you need to know. My heart pounded as I read on. I've made a terrible mistake. There's a woman at work, Gina Hamilton. We had a brief relationship last year. It meant nothing to me. A stupid moment of weakness during a business trip. I ended it immediately, but she's become unstable. She's threatened to tell everyone, that we're still involved. She wants money. At first I paid her, small amounts to keep her quiet, but her demands have grown. Now she's claiming to be pregnant with my child, which is impossible. We were only together once, over a year ago. I've been gathering evidence of her extortion, bank transfers, emails, recordings of our conversations. It's all in a flash drive in the velvet pouch. I'm meeting with a lawyer next week to discuss a restraining order. I'm so sorry, Abby. I never meant to hurt you. Whatever happens, know that I love you. You're the only one I've ever truly loved. Forgive me, Mark. I sat motionless, tears streaming down my face. The letter was dated 2 days before his accident, before his death. With shaking hands, I opened the velvet pouch and found a small flash drive. I slipped it and the letter into my purse, then called Eleanor back in. Are you all right? She asked, seeing my tear-streaked face. I will be, I promised. Let's take these documents and go. That night, alone in my home office, I plugged the flash drive into my computer. It contained exactly what Mark had described: evidence of Gina's extortion, email threads where she demanded money, voice recordings where she threatened to ruin him if he didn't pay, bank statements showing transfers to an account in her name. In the final recording, dated just 3 days before his death, her voice was cold and calculating. You think you can just pay me off and I'll disappear? It doesn't work that way, Mark. I own you now. And if you don't give me what I want, I'll destroy everything you care about. Your marriage, your career, your perfect little life. By the time I'm done, Abby will hate you, your mother will disown you, and you'll be lucky if you're not in jail. Mark's voice, strained but determined. This ends now, Gina. I've documented everything. The payments, the threats. I'm going to the police. Her laugh sent chills down my spine. With what evidence? Your word against mine? I'll tell them you've been stalking me, harassing me. I'll show them the gifts you gave me, the messages you sent. Who do you think they'll believe? The married executive or the poor single woman just trying to do her job? I have recordings, bank records. Recordings can be edited, payments can be explained. You have no idea who you're dealing with, Mark. I've destroyed better men than you. The recording ended there. I sat in the dark, staring at my screen, a cold rage building inside me. This woman had tormented my husband, possibly driven him to his death, and now was trying to steal my home using a child that might not even be hers as leverage. It was time to end her game. Tuesday morning, I called Patricia and sent her copies of everything I'd found. Then I contacted Carlos with new instructions. By afternoon, I had a plan. I waited until Wednesday to confront Gina. I found her in the office kitchen, alone, fixing herself tea. We need to talk, I said quietly, about the will, about Tyler. She turned, her practiced sympathetic expression sliding into place. Of course. I know this is difficult. Not here, I interrupted. My house. Tonight at 7. I can do that. She smiled, confident. I'm glad you're being reasonable about this, Abby. Oh, I'm being very reasonable, I assured her. See you tonight. At 6:45, I was ready. Patricia sat in my living room, documents spread across the coffee table. Carlos waited in the kitchen, out of sight. Eleanor had insisted on being there too, sitting rigidly on my sofa, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The doorbell rang at 7 sharp. I took a deep breath and opened it to find Gina standing there, alone. No Tyler tonight? I asked as I led her to the living room. He's with a sitter. I thought this might be tense. She stopped short when she saw Patricia and Eleanor. I didn't realize this would be a group meeting. Please sit down, I said, gesturing to an armchair facing the three of us. This is Patricia Chen, my attorney. And you know Eleanor, Mark's mother. Gina sat stiffly, her confident smile faltering slightly. Is this really necessary? I thought we could discuss this amicably. Oh, I'm very interested in being amicable, I said, my voice deadly calm. Let's start with your real name. Is it Gina Hamilton? Gina Harper? Or Regina Woodson? Her face paled, but she recovered quickly. I don't know what you're talking about. I changed my name after my divorce, that's all. And before that, in Michigan, with Harold Brennan, I placed the photo Carlos had found on the table between us. He died rather suddenly, didn't he? Just before your wedding. This is ridiculous, she snapped. What does any of this have to do with Mark's will? The will is fake, Patricia interjected calmly. We've confirmed that no such document was ever filed, and the attorney who supposedly drafted it, James Whitman, doesn't exist in any bar association registry in this state. Gina's eyes darted between us. Mark gave me that will. If it's not official, that's not my fault. Mark didn't give you anything, I said, pulling out his letter. He wrote this 2 days before he died. Would you like me to read it aloud? I don't know what game you're playing. It's not a game, Eleanor cut in, her voice shaking with anger. You're trying to use my son's death for your own gain, claiming a child he never fathered. Tyler is Mark's son, Gina insisted, but her voice had lost its conviction. Where was Tyler born, Gina? I asked quietly. Which hospital? Because we can't find any birth records for him. Not here, not in Michigan, not in Colorado. Her hands clenched in her lap. This is harassment. I'm leaving. Before you do, I said. You should know that everything Mark recorded, your threats, your extortion, has been given to the police. And Carlos here, I nodded toward the kitchen where he now stood, has provided them with quite an interesting history of your activities in other states. Gina stood abruptly. You can't prove anything. Maybe not everything, I conceded. But enough. Enough to launch an investigation. Enough to question your custody of Tyler. In her way, who, by the way, looks remarkably similar to a baby reported missing from a Denver hospital 14 months ago. The color drained completely from her face. That's a lie. Is it? The police seem very interested in testing Tyler's DNA. This was a bluff. Carlos had found similarities in news reports, but nothing conclusive. Yet, Gina grabbed her purse. I'm not listening to this. You're just a bitter widow who can't accept that her husband loved someone else. Mark didn't love you, I said, rising to face her. He was afraid of you. And with good reason, apparently. She lunged forward suddenly, reaching for Mark's letter on the table. I stepped between her and the documents as Carlos moved quickly from the kitchen. In the confusion, Gina's purse fell open, spilling its contents across my floor. Among the scattered items was a small amber prescription bottle. I picked it up before she could grab it. Propranolol, I read aloud, looking at the label. Isn't this a heart medication? The same kind Harold Brennan was taking before his heart attack? Gina snatched the bottle from my hand. It's for anxiety. Give me my things. But I'd seen enough. The prescription wasn't in her name. It was for Mark Preston. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Mark's unexpected heart failure during what should have been a minor accident. The missing medication from his nightstand that I'd attributed to first responders or hospital staff. You killed him? I whispered, the realization like ice in my veins. You tampered with his medication. And then, when he threatened to expose you, you made sure he had an accident. That's insane, she hissed. But her eyes were wild now, darting toward the door. You can't prove any of this. Maybe not today. I agreed. But the police are very thorough once they start looking. And they're already looking, Gina. She backed toward the door. This isn't over. Actually, I said, it is. As she fled, Patricia picked up her phone. I'll call Detective Rivera. He'll want to know about the medication. Eleanor was shaking, tears streaming down her face. I sat beside her, taking her hand in mine. Did she kill my son? She asked brokenly. I don't know for certain, I answered honestly, but we're going to find out. It took 3 more weeks for the full truth to emerge. The police investigation revealed that Tyler was indeed the missing baby from Denver, abducted by a woman matching Gina's description who had posed as a hospital volunteer. DNA testing confirmed he wasn't related to either Mark or Gina. The medication bottle provided critical evidence. Forensic analysis showed Mark's pills had been replaced with a much higher dosage, enough to cause disorientation or unconsciousness while driving. Not technically murder, but certainly manslaughter if they could prove she'd tampered with them. Gina fled the state the night of our confrontation, but was apprehended at the Canadian border 3 days later. Tyler, with her. The baby was returned to his real parents in Denver, a reunion that made national news. As for me, I finally had answers, though they brought more pain than closure. Mark had made a terrible mistake, one that ultimately cost him his life. But he hadn't abandoned me, hadn't fathered another woman's child, hadn't written a will giving away my home. 6 months after Mark's death, I stood in our backyard, watching Eleanor plant bulbs along the fence line. She visited often now, our shared grief and quest for justice having forged a deeper bond between us. The prosecutor called, I told her, handing her a glass of lemonade. They've added identity theft and fraud charges based on evidence from Michigan. They're confident she'll serve significant time. Eleanor nodded, wiping soil from her hands. It doesn't bring him back. No, I agreed. Nothing will. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The grief was still there, would always be there, but the anger had subsided, replaced by a quiet determination to move forward. I'm selling the house, I said suddenly. It's too big for just me. Too many memories. Eleanor squeezed my hand. Where will you go? I'm not sure yet. Somewhere new. Somewhere I can start fresh. I smiled faintly. But not too far. I want to be able to have Sunday tea with you. I'd like that, she said softly. Later that night, alone in my kitchen, I opened the notebook where I'd been documenting everything since that first birthday party, when Gina had made her outrageous claim. The final entry detailed her sentencing, 15 to 20 years for a litany of charges, including kidnapping, identity fraud, extortion, and involuntary manslaughter. The woman who had tried to steal my life, who had possibly taken my husband's, would spend most of her remaining youth behind bars. Her schemes, her lies, her manipulations had finally caught up with her. Some might call it justice, others karma, but I knew the truth. It wasn't revenge that had brought Gina down. It was patience, thoroughness, a refusal to be intimidated or bullied into surrender. In the end, I hadn't needed to destroy her. She'd done that all by herself. I'd simply made sure she couldn't escape the consequences of her actions. I closed the notebook and placed it on a shelf in my office, a reminder not of what I'd lost, but of what I'd survived. Tomorrow, I would call a real estate agent. The day after, I would look at apartments closer to downtown. Life would go on, and somewhere in Denver, a little boy named Tyler was back with his real parents. Too young to remember the woman who had tried to use him as a pawn in her deadly game. That, perhaps, was the most important victory of all. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who thought they could manipulate you, hit that like button. If this story of patience and justice resonated with you, subscribe for more true life-inspired tales of resilience. And if you know someone dealing with gaslighting or manipulation, share this video with them. Sometimes seeing through someone else's experience helps us recognize what's happening in our own lives. Drop a comment below with your thoughts on Abby's journey. What would you have done in her situation?